Hi, folks. You know, Democrats have a funny way of redefining words. Patriotism now means hating the other half of the country. Fair maps means carving out seats for themselves. And leadership apparently means ducking responsibility while blaming everyone else. Today, we've got Jasmine Crockett declaring MAGA the most unpatriotic, and Gavin Newsom acting like he didn't participate with his own party bosses in rigging the California congressional map while secretly eyeing a presidential promotion himself. Tonight's clips show the greatest Democrat trick in the book, failing upward while insisting they're the real patriots, even as their hypocrisy flies a mile wide and an inch deep.
You know, the idea that we thought January 6th was a problem and we thought, oh man, that's bad. And, you know, his army then was a bunch of white nationalist races, whether we're talking about the Proud Boys or the neo-Nazis or whomever, those guys were the ones that made up his army on that day to try to pull a coup. Now you're talking about a guy that every time he disagrees with something, he uses the power that he has because no one around him is checking him, whether we're talking about those in his administration or whether we're talking about the courts or if we're talking about the Congress. That is one of the reasons he is so desperate to make sure that he can win in the midterms, is because he knows that Democrats, it's not even about partisanship. It's about doing what's right. It's about doing the American thing. And to be clear, you can wave all the flags you want to, but I am telling you right now that the most unpatriotic people that we have in this country are MAGA and this president. We are
Democrats
the real patriots,
hate this
and it
country.
is time for us to take our flag
Dare you
back
to prove me
and
wrong.
show people what America is about.
You don't even
can't
see a
say that
single
you love the
flag in your
Constitution
studios.
while decimating it with every single
got two
stroke
right
of
here.
a pen for an executive order, while decimating it, while you are disrespecting our troops that have signed up to protect our freedoms, not just here, but abroad. And then you're taking people's freedoms away using those exact same troops.
Take a breath. Jasmine Crockett has to be one of the worst politicians in the country. Not only thoroughly dishonest, disingenuous, and just virtue signaling nonstop, it's honestly painful to watch how much she leans on that alone. She's like that gamer who found a cheat code and keeps spamming it until the whole server crashes. Every line is the same recycled Marxist grievance. Race, 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 race. No original thought, no substance, no policy insight, just a stream of righteous indignation dressed up as patriotism. All of it backed by Marxist-style grievance politics. And the irony here is staggering. Crockett rants for nearly 2 minutes without making a single coherent point. Just one long emotional tantrum while Greasy Gavin, sits there with that smug grin on his face like he's watching his favorite puppet perform. He doesn't care about the content. He cares that the script is being followed. This is the Democrat strategy in 2025, folks. Patriotism by declaration, not by actual deed. They tell you they're patriots while openly undermining the nation's sovereignty. Whether it's ignoring federal immigration law or redrawing congressional maps to guarantee their own power, they scream about protecting democracy or freedom while pushing policies that restrict speech, dictate how you run your business, and treat dissent as treason. And the rhetorical sleight of hand here is obvious. Call your opponents unpatriotic, accuse them of hating America, and suddenly you don't have to answer for the chaos in your own backyard. It's classic projection. Take your own failures, staple them onto your opponent, and hope nobody notices. But what we're seeing here isn't just bad politics, folks. It's the culture war distilled. Democrats have spent decades capturing the language of morality. If you wave a rainbow flag, guess what? You're righteous. If you critique their policies, you're the bigot. They've weaponized shame and identity to the point where patriotism itself has been rebranded as loyalty to the Democrat Party. That's what Crockett means when she says, we are the real patriots. She doesn't mean love for the country. She means obedience to their ideology. That's the real test in the world. And look, bigger picture here, this isn't just one loud congresswoman ranting into a microphone. It's a reflection of how deeply corrupted the institutions of media, education, and politics have become. Emotion replaces any sort of substantive argument. Identity replaces evidence. Narrative replaces truth. When Democrats can stand on a stage, drape themselves in a flag, and declare themselves as sole owners of patriotism while openly eroding this country's stability, it tells you everything about where America is right now. The game has been rigged. And the people doing the rigging are the ones still insisting they're saving democracy.
ICE, for the most part, is nothing but a ride. That's all they were supposed to do for the most part, right? It's like, you know what? This person is undocumented, or this person re-enters the country illegally, all the things, and then they have an ICE hold. And then ICE gets them so they can then send them out. That's all ICE is supposed to do. Look at them as a fancy Uber driver for immigrants. That's all they're supposed to do. And now they're running into places and doing raids, and they're falling all over each other, injuring each other. Like, we are a joke, but it is a bad nightmare of a joke. And so I don't think that this president has any limits that he won't go to.
This selective blind spot is just absolutely insane, because we all know, folks, that none of these ICE captures in the wild would even be happening if sanctuary laws didn't exist. Traditionally, ICE isn't roaming neighborhoods like some immigration SWAT team. Their job is targeted. They go into jails, prisons, and detention centers where there's already cooperation with local law enforcement. Law enforcement arrests someone, ICE gets the information, and if the person is here illegally, especially if they committed crimes, they process them for deportation. Simple, but states like California, under Gavin Newsom's sanctuary policies, deliberately cut off that cooperation. So now ICE has no choice but to chase people down in communities, creating exactly the scenario Jasmine Crockett ridicules as a bad joke, except the punchline isn't ICE, it's the sanctuary politicians who forced the situation in the first place. And here's a deeper issue, folks. Crockett's framing that ICE should just be a fancy Uber driver for illegal immigrants isn't just ignorant, it's absolutely dangerous. It reduces the role of federal immigration enforcement to nothing more than a chauffeur service, stripping away the core responsibility of protecting public safety and enforcing immigration law, enforcing our national sovereignty. ICE doesn't exist to hand out courtesy rides. It exists because immigration law means nothing if there's no enforcement mechanism. To call them a glorified Uber is to erase the reality that many people ICE apprehends are not harmless families. They're individuals with criminal convictions, repeat offenders, and deportation orders who chose to ignore the law. Pretending otherwise is a deliberate act of deception meant to tug at heartstrings while ignoring hard facts. Now, why does this narrative work for Democrats? Because it's emotionally appealing. It paints ICE as villains, immigrants as eternal victims, and Democrats as the righteous defenders of compassion. But compassion divorced from law creates chaos. Sanctuary policies don't make immigrants safer. They make communities less safe because they push enforcement out of the controlled environment of jails into unpredictable neighborhoods. And the irony is thick. The very chaos Crockett mocks ICE for is a direct result of the policies of the guy sitting directly next to her, who's smiling throughout this whole monologue. You see Gavin nodding along, smiling smugly. It's absolutely infuriating because he knows better. He understands that California's sanctuary policies created this mess. They're purposely creating the crisis, folks, because it's politically convenient to laugh along as Crockett reduces ICE to a punchline. This is how the game works. Deny responsibility, project blame onto the federal government, and then pose as a champion of justice when the inevitable dysfunction appears. It's theater through and through, and unfortunately, it's theater with real-world consequences that you at home and your families are experiencing and suffering either directly or indirectly. And since we're on the topic of California politics, the retards over in Sacramento are still spewing out reasons why they think the redistricting is good vengeance that the Democrats should impose on an entirely different state. It's funny how all of a sudden Democrats are all opposed to the rule of law, throwing out the Constitution and one of its main principles, that being federalism.
They have done all of this. They have this record. So the midterms are about running on your record. Why is it that they are so afraid of their record that Donald Trump is calling folks across the state, governors, to say, find me votes, because I know come 2026, folks are going to continue to be scared about the fact that tariffs are making the cost of goods go up and the access to inventory go down and the ability to find a job even worse. We are seeing the numbers start to crater. So this is what is happening. He is afraid that people are waking up to his record, and the Republicans are afraid that the American people are waking up to their shenanigans, and they, to what you just said, are trying to rig elections. And California is saying, oh, no, you didn't. You got receipts. We got receipts. We're putting them all on the table, and we are doing all we can to make the midterm elections be as fair as possible. I have a Republican colleague who all of a sudden is like, oh, no. Let's not do any of this. Independent redistricting, independent commission. And Zoe Lofgren, a colleague of mine in California, had a bill that every Democrat voted on that said, let's do national independent commissions. And every Republican voted against. So now all of a sudden, you've seen the light? I don't think so. They are so disingenuous and they are so cowardice.
Are you looking in the mirror as you say this?
California is standing up and saying, oh no, boo-boo, we're coming for you.
Everything a Democrat accuses a Republican of doing is really just them telling on themselves. That's the rule of thumb, folks. Projection as politics. So when State Senator Camlogger Dove says Republicans are afraid of the record and trying to rig elections, she's not describing reality. She's describing her own party's playbook. Because the record Democrats have built, especially in California, is one of manipulation, distortion, and self-preservation at all costs. They have to hold on to power no matter what. But before we get to that, let's break all of this down, because she talks about independent redistricting commissions as though Democrats are champions of fairness. On paper, these commissions sound noble. Nonpartisan panels drawing maps to avoid politicians gaming the system. But what actually happened? Well, Democrats figured out how to game the very system designed to stop the gaming that voters voted against. They stacked the process with identity-based testimony, activists paraded as community voices, and witnesses whose sole role was to shape maps towards a progressive advantage. The ideal of fairness got gutted completely. And now California, where Republicans make up over 40% of registered voters, is represented by barely 17% of Republicans in Congress. That's not democracy. That's engineered disenfranchisement. Twice, folks, the voters of California supported ballot measures to create these commissions, only for Democrats to twist them beyond recognition. And when Republicans push back, well, Democrats cry, cowardice. No. What we're watching is the Democrat talent for taking an institution built to restrain politicians and bending it into a pretzel to extend their power. And this embarrassment of a politician defects into scapegoating. She ties tariffs, inflation, and cratering numbers to Trump, as if California's economic mess is imported from Mar-a-Lago. Let's be honest, folks. California's problems are all homegrown. This is the state with the highest gas prices, the highest utility costs, the most homelessness, the largest exodus of businesses, and some of the worst educational outcomes, despite spending more per student than almost anywhere else in the country and most places on earth. That's not Trump's tariff policy. That's Democrat governance and policies. The cruel irony here, folks, is that while all of this is happening, California still boasts the world's fourth largest economy only because of its ports and imports from China. The same Democrats decrying foreign influence in Washington are the ones who've tied their state's survival to Beijing's shipping lanes. All of this reveals something bigger about today's America. The Democrat Party has become addicted to rhetorical inversion. They wrap themselves in the language of fairness, equality, all these fuzzy euphemisms, while subverting each of those ideas in practice. Lecture us about rigged elections while manipulating redistricting. They invoke equity while crushing the working class with cost of living policies. They preach patriotism while bending the knee to global powers. And their cultural weapon of choice is always the same: fear. Fear of Trump, fear of Republicans, fear of democracy being stolen, when in reality, it's their policies eroding the trust and stability of our civic life and ultimately undoing our constitutional republic from within. All that being said, folks, there's a clip of Gavin Newsom that's going viral from the press conference where they announced that they were rolling out this measure to undo the will of California voters. And here's a clip.
Who are responsible for these maps? It's ultimately Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas and Senate Pro Tem Mike McGuire. They are not here to answer our questions about ultimately these maps. I know, I'd love to. This is the second time they haven't shown up when a ballot measure is placed on the ballot by the legislature to answer questions from reporters. My question is, if those two end up running for Congress after this, or
Ashley,
I mean, just how could that impact this campaign? How could that impact this campaign? I mean, considering voters did not want politicians drawing lines for themselves.
You'll have to ask them. You have to ask them.
Now, for context here, folks, we've got a very bizarrely twitching Greasy Gavin, constantly touching his nose, shifting around, looking distracted, the kind of behavior that, let's just say, has sparked a lot of speculation online. I'm not going to make a medical diagnosis here, but you don't have to be a body language expert to notice he looks more like a guy trying to hide something than a governor answering for his state. And what's he doing while he fidgets? Well, he's dodging questions about whether two of his top legislative allies, Robert Rivas and Mike McGuire, conveniently drew new congressional maps that might benefit their own careers. Instead of addressing the obvious conflict of interest here, Greasy Gavin just shrugs and says, "You'll have to ask them." This isn't just a brush off. It's emblematic of California politics today, folks. The party that once bragged about independent redistricting commissions now hides behind evasions while insiders carve up power for themselves, and the governor acts like a spectator to corruption happening right under his nose. Literally. It's a perfect snapshot of how Democrats govern. It's a rhetoric of fairness on the surface, but under it all, a one-party authoritarian machine that rewrites the rules to keep themselves in charge. And so the question becomes, how much longer can we tolerate of the Democrats in charge who shrug off accountability while rewriting the rules in favor of themselves and their party? At what point do we stop treating evasion, smirks, and empty slogans as politics as usual and start recognizing them for what they are? Symptoms of a system that thrives on distraction and decay. If the Democrats tasked with guarding fairness are the ones quietly rigging the game, what does that say about the health of our constitutional republic? Or about us, if we let that slide? These moments aren't just about political gossip, folks. They're windows into the machinery of power. And the more you look, the more obvious it becomes that the stories we're told rarely match the reality behind the curtain. So ask yourself, are you seeing the play they want you to watch? Or are you paying attention to what's really happening behind the scenes? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.